there was really this sense of on our leadership of like, what does it look like to not just plant churches, but to like pause church planting so that we can weave in justice and mercy more into kind of our practices and our identity, not just as an aspirational thing that we respond to, that like we say we do, we say we believe in, and when there's a need that shows up, we are able to step into it, but really as a proactive, sustained part of who we are. And we were still a younger church. We continue to be a younger church. But at that point, I and some others on leadership, we recognized that to do this, to weave in justice and mercy into a greater sense of who we are, it meant that we would have to pause church planting. So our resources would temporarily stop going there so that we could more thoroughly integrate these values into who we are. So the next church we planted had this in its DNA.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pivot Podcast. This is the podcast where we explore how the church can faithfully navigate a changing world. I'm Terry Eldon, and I'm joined today with my co-host, Dwight Shiley.
One of the key pivots that we talk about here at Faith+Lead is a pivot in posture from focusing on fixing institutional problems to listening and discerning where God is leading. Today's guest, Bryan Halferty, knows a thing or two about that as a church planter in the Pacific Northwest. Bryan is a lead pastor of Anchor Church in Tacoma, Washington, which he planted in 2017 alongside his wife, Candice, their 2 kids, and a small dedicated team. He's currently writing a book, Terrible Beauty, which is reflecting on the spiritually formative and hard-fought insights that he gained through the challenge of planting Anchor Church. Bryan, welcome to the Pivot Podcast.
Oh, so good to be with you guys. Thanks for the invite.
So tell us a bit about yourself and your journey into the world of church planting.
Yeah, so 2 questions there. There's the personal and then the professional. But my wife Candice and I, we've been married for 20 years. We just celebrated 20 years together, which was fun to look back on those time together. But yeah, look forward to. And my daughter Zoe's 14, and my son Soren is 11. So that gives us a little picture of our family, I guess. But regarding church planting, kind of this entrance into the world of church planting, I guess you could say, like, if you think about the times in your life when you're imagining what will become of me, where my professional ambition's going to go, your average frat guys, might be thinking starry-eyed about a dive bar, that they're going to start sometime in the future as a group of friends, or tech bros or girls might be imagining some new killer app or some groundbreaking tech startup. And a lot of Christian entrepreneurial folk, they imagine a church. What would it look like to have my own giftings blend with this community? And so I remember, when I was a young Jesus follower as a college student, dreaming about it, in the conceptual space, late night conversations, whatever. And my friend and I, we talked constantly about this bookstore church that was going to be a front, this kind of bookstore. Sundays it'd be a church, and I think now about like who would be the investor to invest in this book. But anyways, that was kind of, it always enters through the space of imagination and dreams and potentialities before it can enter into the real actual. And that was some of the first times I thought about it. And I think I remember one time at an event, somebody, the main stage speaker, it was one of those things where like you bump into them in the lobby, and it's one of these, you have to tamp down your breath, keep your breathing, this person's a person, it's a person. But we bumped into each other, and I just think I said something kind of like complimentary, like, oh, that was really moving, or thanks for sharing, or whatever, what have you, whatever Christian people say, And he said, well, hey, maybe we should plant a church together. And I was like, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know. But there's this what if that popped in. And it was funny, 8 years later, he was the one that invited me to kind of consider this church planting opportunity. So I guess I just say that because I think there are these seed-like things, like in conversations with friends, but then professional opportunities, who knows how they'll arrive. But anyways, that was how it moved. We can go more into kind of the details of that invitation and the discernment process, but that's a little bit of my entrance into it.
So take us through, let's go there. Take us where, okay, this dreaming of like what if church could be, to actually saying, I think we have an idea here, and maybe it was the idea of Anchor or what became Anchor. And then what were the first steps you did to kind of move that idea into a reality or to hone it down?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think, like, first of all, starting something like Anchor means you're leaving, or any church, it means you're leaving something else, right? So because it's a new thing. And so I think I was in a pretty comfortable role as a college pastor. And I started to, you start to see where the ceilings are in your role. I just started noticing these. And I think that everybody notices these at some point. If you don't, maybe you're not growing or not paying attention, or maybe you're a CEO with a ridiculous amount of money and no supervision. And then I think anytime you're there, you have to say, do I like the ceiling? Or do I want a vaulted ceiling or a skylight? And it was about 8 years in where I started to see some of these like things, and I wondered, what could else there be? What else could there be? And it was then with that who became a mentor reached out to me and asked about this church planting opportunity. But really, that began this process of discerning. And I think that there are these practical steps where a conversation becomes a commitment, and then the commitment becomes, there's this process where I'm working on a proposal that has these kind of ideas of what this church might be for about 9 months. When we had committed to the idea of a church plant, we actually didn't have a name for it. We called it the Tacoma plant. And because we wanted to hold off as long as possible on a name. And so is my proposal even to this day. It's called the Tacoma plant. I can look it up, and has everything from psychographics to demographics to kind of like values and organizational structures. But then this process moves into, I think the process, it moves into kind of like packing a U-Haul. I don't know. There's so many directions to go. I guess one of the interesting things that pops to mind is when I was still as this college pastor, about a couple hours away from Tacoma, where we presently live and where Anchor is. I remember inviting college students to our house to hear about the church. I was trying to convince them to move with us. And some of them had friends in Tacoma, and some of them didn't, but some of them were graduating. And I remember asking everybody to name where they were at between 1 and 3 at the end of me pitching this dream. And 1 was, I'm just here for a friend, don't ask anything of me. And 3 is, I'm ready to sign the paper, let's do it. And I remember it being all 1s, and being totally like, okay, blink test. Are we going to go forward? Is this going to happen? But slowly those 1s become 1.3s or 2.4s. They start making these different numbers up to make sure that I know that they're not fully there yet. But some of those people actually are still plugged into the Anchor, church. So I think that when you think about like, where did it start? How did this thing become a real thing? It's like, there's all these threads. There's the programmatic, there's the practical, there's this process. And then there's this relational piece where you're inviting people into a dream, into something that doesn't exist. And they have to believe in it like you do and become a 3, so to speak.
I love the testing of that. And we talk a lot about faithful innovation and the iterations, right? You have to listen. You have to test some things quickly, get feedback, change. You can't take your first idea, for example, and say, that's it, right? Yeah. And it sounds like you really took that process seriously, and people took you seriously to give you that good feedback.
Yeah, sometimes I think of it like, it's like the errand boy and the princess. That's the metaphor I sometimes use, where this princess is this beautiful thing up in a tower, and your church only becomes a church if the princess of this idealized situation marries the errand boy of reality. And that's the only way. And so the ideal it never happens. I remember some of those guys in that room, the folks in the room, saying, I remember, this sounds so dumb, but whispering, white subway tiles. Imagine a church with white subway tiles. And I'm like, now looking back, I'm like, it's like It's not only surface level, but there's no white subway tiles at all over Anchor. The original name was Salt and Light. And I remember testing it with people and being like, yeah, I don't know. What does it mean? And it's too opaque. So I think there's this process where, the ideal never becomes the real. And it's in that process of testing it. And that sorts itself out.
Well, so give us a picture of what Anchor Church looks like today. Who participates? How are you contextualizing the gospel in the Tacoma community?
Well, so Anchor is 3 congregations right now. We have 2 in the city of Tacoma, one in a neighborhood called Lincoln, and Anchor Central is not central because it's like the central hub, but it's in the central Tacoma. And then another congregation, Lakewood, which is in an adjacent city. So there's 3 congregations, and I would say throughout all of these congregations, there's what I would call like this sense of holistic diversity, which is economic, ethnic, generational, which is beautiful to see and sometimes interesting to manage and lead. So there are folks that are all spiritually diverse, so people that an increasing amount of people that aren't followers of Jesus, but are sensing this hunger that they can't name and are wondering if Christianity, if the church might have an answer for it. So participates, I'm trying to paint a picture of that folks that maybe are participating. I'd say, most of the people that stay kind of appreciate these kind of parallel values of being grounded in historic faith, but also nuanced and thinking about things in ways that appreciate subtlety, but also, grounded in what the church has always believed, spiritual fire and spiritual formation. Those are some things that will come up in conversation, even if the words don't express them, aren't the same. So how we're contextualizing the gospel, I think that it's such an interesting question. I mean, I feel like it's something that was so urgent and important for me on the front end of church planting that feels like now I feel like I'm speaking the native language. And so the contextualizing happens much easier. There's a challenge of that is that you just get stuck into this is how you do it. So I'm having to reach back into kind of some of those earlier years in 2017, 2018. And so we would listen to contextualizing early on. We would listen a lot to where the pain is. You could say where the promise and where the pain is of a place. And I think that contextualizing the gospel always involves where is the gift of this city? Where is the beauty of this neighborhood? Where's the beauty of my neighbor? And where's the thing that like the God-madeness of this place? And where is the unique pain that whether it keeps them up at night or stirs them to tears pretty easily? And when you have those things together, you have a glimpse of, I think, what the Lord wants to do, I would say. So how are we? You asked that question. How are we contextualizing it? I think we're listening to those two things and responding. And maybe we can get to some of the ways of the how later.
Well, I think there's a good tie to the question I want to ask here. On your church website, it says this: it may sound counterintuitive, but our main goal is not to make a good church. It's to partner with God in making a great city. Now, one of the things I love about that is it's very theological. It says a lot about your theology. God is active and God is in the world, right? What does that mean in practice for you? How has that helped you think through some of the things you just talked about?
Well, you're right. It is theological. I remember early on the Jonah 4, where God says, "Shouldn't I have great love for this city or this great city?" And then Acts 8:8. I don't know if you remember this, but Philip goes to Samaria. He's getting chased out of Jerusalem, and he does all this ministry. And at the end of that, 8:8, it says, and there was great joy in that city. And so that's kind of been this kind of heartbeat for us with regards to that. And so I think it has to be mentioned, admittedly, there was kind of like, it was a nice thing that reflected good theology, as you mentioned for us. And we were saying it aspirationally. We were saying it as like, we want to be this. We want to become this. This is what we believe. This is what we're, So I think, but it positioned us to think about things in ways that sent us outside of the walls. We use this language of anchor is both a harbor, has to be both a harbor and a base. A harbor is a place of safety from a challenging environment. A base is a place of sending out to. So, and we use the language of gather and scatter. We try to weave that into our people, that we are, a church exists in these rhythms of gathering and scattering. I guess on the ground floor, what this, one thing that rises to my mind initially is, not only did we desire to be a church that plants churches, but about a year and a half ago, after planting 3 churches, 2 congregations, we would say, we'd include that, and another autonomous church, and then helping out spur on a lot of other church plants, there was really this sense of on our leadership of what does it look like to not just plant churches, but to pause church planting, so that we can weave in justice and mercy more into kind of our practices and our identity, not just as an aspirational thing that we respond to, that we say we do, we say we believe in, and when there's a need that shows up, we are able to step into it, but really as a proactive, sustained part of who we are. And we were still a younger church. We continue to be a younger church. But at that point, I and some others on leadership, we recognized that to do this, to weave in justice and mercy into a greater sense of who we are, it meant that we would have to pause church planting. So our resources would temporarily stop going there so that we could more thoroughly integrate these values into who we are. So the next church we planted had this in its DNA. So that as we paused church planting, it meant all of our staff had scheduling audits, with their events and their ministries, to see how justice and mercy was woven in along with their normal church plants, church ministries activities. So even kids ministry, how would justice and mercy weave in? How would in our hospitality ministry, justice and mercy weave in? How would in our groups ministry weave in? These things, began to be, and now I would say are much more, not just an aspirational, responsive thing, but a sustained, proactive part of who we are. One of the ways I would say with the groups way that we tried to kind of in a practical way, kind of provide kind of imaginative vision for this was in our groups ministry, we would partner along with a group if there was a group, if the group knew of a need in their neighborhood. It could be a financial need. It could be not really a financial need, but there might be financial elements into it. We would match whatever, as Anchor, would match whatever the group contributed, so that their impact was doubled as they addressed a local micro need. And that was a really cool way for us to kind of unleash creativity and unleash kingdom impact at the same time.
I want to make a note. If anybody doesn't know where Tacoma is, to be a harbor and a sending place is kind of the mission of the city. Yeah. Or it's hard to not be in it and know that that's a part of its heartbeat.
Well, the language is intentional there. So Tacoma is about 30 minutes south of Seattle, if you're unfamiliar with it, and it is set on the water. And there's a military base close by, and there's a city called Gig Harbor close by. So this language of harbor and base has a lot of resonance, not only with the scriptural story, but with the kind of the local demographics as well. So yeah, there is an intentional use of language there that we were leveraging.
I also think, these are contextual pieces, right? As you were talked about earlier. I also think, and maybe you can say about this as you kind of think forward, how were other efforts also trying to impact the good of the city, right? My sense is, I have been there recently, and I've seen new life come where once it was kind of run down or tired, right? How do you see that kind of helping the movement of this and partnering with the world, not just other churches? Do you know what I mean? Like, for the good of the city is different.
So you're absolutely right. And so part of the ways that a church, part of the ways it might sound like a little bit of a cop-out, but part of the ways that the church partners with the city is giving worth and dignity to everyone that's in the room on a Sunday in their professional roles and helping them have a kingdom imagination for their job, that it has a unique element of calling. And so sometimes the church might not always have the open doors to like bless a university in the ways that the university needs a resource. But the church can bless a university by the college professors and the administrative staff, knowing that as they step into their jobs, it isn't something that is auxiliary to the church, but it is elemental. It is they are being the church. So so Tacoma is such a fascinating city because it has a history of kind of a blue collar, crime infested, so to speak, city in the Northwest. It's, as I like kind of to joke with some friends, if Seattle got Seattle, Portland, and Tacoma were all brothers. Seattle got an MBA from Stanford and is doing just fine. And Portland went to art school and has showings all over the West Coast. And Tacoma was in jail for a couple of decades and got out, but is doing just fine and actually has made a living. And you'd be surprised at some of the creative works that it's doing as a hobby. So, and I say that as a person who loves Tacoma. And so I think from 2007, people that know the city well would be able to point to, well, when University of Washington Tacoma entered into abandoned buildings in the downtown core, there began a urban renewal that has been stifled at various points, but continues to, through fits and starts, move forward, that has made Tacoma actually quite attractive to those on the inside. In fact, there's a funny line. People know maybe Austin and Portland, how they have the line, keep Portland weird or keep Austin weird. Tacoma's bumper sticker is keep Tacoma feared, because there's this desire to have an insight, don't let them know that Tacoma is such a beautiful city.
Thanks. That's beautiful. I appreciate that.
Well, so I'm curious to know a bit more about the Anchor Lakewood and Anchor Lincoln campuses or congregations, however you describe this. How did you all discern that new locations or ministries were needed to be started in those areas? And then how do the three relate to one another?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, very practically, we pulled all the addresses that we have at our church management system and plotted them on a Google map. We started with a bias towards horizontality so that we would not be a church that's kind of like ascending vertically, but we would be a church that's empowering and unleashing. And I'm not an ideologue, so I think I was when we planted the church. I've been demystified. But that's kind of a bias that we have as part of how we approach ministry. So we started with that bias, that planting and horizontal growth. So we pull these addresses, we put them on a Google map, and we do this thing, we just call it praying the perimeter. We have these, sometimes if we're considering a plant, if we're considering starting a new congregation, we'll just have them on our desk and as prayer focuses. And sometimes we'll drive around the perimeter, but most often we're just looking at this map and thinking of the names of people that are on the farthest out perimeter, and just asking God, is there a new space where these two things show up, desire and need, right? So these people are coming in or have some type of affiliation with Anchor for one of our congregations, or if you map out all three of our congregations. So there's this mix of whatever you would maybe call it desire and need that's compelling them towards us. Now, sometimes you say, hey, aren't there some sometimes they're like, you want to say, you could just find a church that's closer to you, don't drive all the way in. But for whatever reason, they're doing that. And so we use that as kind of a template or heuristic matrix, whatever you'd like to call it, to get us going towards that discernment process. How we relate to each other. We are all one legal entity. So there's different ways to kind of like do this kind of horizontal approach, different levels of affiliation. We do call them congregations instead of campuses because we think that lends itself to a slightly more autonomy in how we would understand it. So they have live teaching and they have in some elements of contextualization that are unique to the neighborhoods that they are in. So for instance, our Lincoln congregation, it's in one of the most ethnically diverse areas of the Pacific Northwest. And so it has that reflected on a Sunday morning. And their music is much more infused with gospel than, for instance, Anchor Central is. And so there's a level of, you could call it contextualization and alignment that is always at interplay within the three congregations. And it's much more of a dance than something that's hard and fast, which sometimes makes leadership and management conversations interesting. But I think it allows us to have a lot more vibrancy into our ministry approach. So again, kind of getting into the more practicals, I meet with the other congregation leads weekly. We sit down, it's a collaborative thing, but it feels collaborative, but it is kind of a direct report conversation. But it's a collaborative approach. And so we're thinking through our problems together. We have our forms that we bring to the meeting where we're talking about our key areas of responsibility and how we can think through together. We have a network meeting on Tuesday where all the staff and volunteers from all of the congregation that are able to come do a training together. We sing together, we study the scriptures together, and it's kind of a galvanizing opportunity for high-level volunteers and staff throughout all of our congregations to really deepen as a community and as disciples and leaders. So that's a little bit of how we relate to each other. I don't maybe know if you can feel free to ask more questions on that.
Well, I want to ask another contextual question. When some of us that don't live in the Pacific Northwest or in Seattle, Tacoma area, we maybe don't think of it as a Christianity hotbed, right? So how do you see that part of the context playing into this? Was it more difficult? Did it actually help the process or refine the process around things? And what are some of the things that you've learned or the ways that you've learned about connecting the gospel to those yearnings that you talked about earlier, especially in a more secular culture?
So I remember having a conversation at a church conference, and a person asked me, I think we were just kind of waiting around, and the teaching was just on deconstruction, which of course is this hot topic, right? And this person who I was getting to know said, "Hey, how have you seen deconstruction show up in the Pacific Northwest?" And it was so fascinating because I started thinking about it, and I know while it's a hot topic and while everybody's talking about it, it's like, and I don't want to be simplistic. I mean, certainly it's a thing that shows up in the church culture in the Pacific Northwest, but it feels like it's very much like a topic that shows up in Nashville more than Seattle. So because I think it's something that is kind of in church-centric cultures, people are finding themselves deconstructing. Honestly, in the Pacific Northwest, I mean, Seattle has had its own thing with some past church frustrations and hurt. But in Tacoma and many areas of the Pacific Northwest, people are actually deconstructing out of secularism. So they're finding themselves actually coming to the point where the secular narratives, whether it's of progress or self-empowerment or whatever, they're finding the limits on those. Just as I mentioned earlier, they're hitting the ceilings on those narratives, and they're asking bigger questions that they aren't finding readily available answers for. And so now I do not want to suggest that there's some massive revival happening in Tacoma. God is certainly working. He is very active, but I do think that there is this seedbed of wrestling. So while it is easy to say, and sometimes admittedly church planners love to say it, most unchurched area of the Pacific Northwest, of the nation, while we love to say that phrase about the unchurchedness because it makes us sound edgy and cool and we're on the front edge, certainly, okay, we are in many respects. But people are going to be people, and humans are human. And there is, like you said, these yearnings that because we are made by God, that we cannot escape, we can't get away from them. We want community. We want hope. It's these funny things. Like, can you imagine? It's like Peter Pan trying to shed his shadow, like, it's like, wait, does he shed his shadow? Can he? Wait, does it? No, I'm sorry, that metaphor doesn't work because it does get away from him. Anyways, but we can't shed these things. They are part of who we are. And so I think that, I had a conversation with my tattoo artist, and he showed up to church about 2 months ago. He's with his family, and he has the most deadpan face. You would think if you looked at him like he just hated you. But there he is in the back of the row, or the back of the church, and he's waiting for me. We've talked about it. He knows I'm a pastor. We follow each other on social media. And that conversation in the back of the church led to 3 weeks later him surrendering his life to Jesus. Now, why? How? I mean, obviously, yes, God is working. But he has this. He said to me, and this is okay that I share that. He's fine. He said, I want to be a good husband, and I want to be a good father. And I don't know how. I'm finding the edge of myself, and I'm wondering how do I be a good husband and a good father? And so this, I think that honestly, if the more honest people get, the more they'll come to similar conclusions. Whether they land themselves in the church, they'll be asking those questions. I mean, let's make it. I mean, I remember when we moved in, my neighbors, I call them, who I love, pentagram chic. They like are something left of Antifa, and love sporting pentagrams. And so like instantly I see this, and the first time, of course, they ask me, what do you do? I'm like, well, gosh, this is some type of opportunity. I don't know what quite it is, but so there's those anxious moments where you have to own the fact of who you are, knowing that some people may have an opinion about that. But God's always working, and people are always going to be people, which means they always have this ache for something bigger than what the world can offer. So I guess there's so much more, obviously, that could be said, but that's where I instantly go with that question.
I think sometimes places like the Pacific Northwest, or now New England, which is also profoundly secular, because you have to start from scratch with introducing people to a gospel that they've never heard, or if they've heard maybe some caricature of at some point and dismissed, rather than assuming that participation in church is some normal thing. It's super abnormal if you're in the West Coast generally, I think, in most places, as someone who grew up there myself in an unchurched family. And so I think there's something really fresh and exciting about that opportunity to say, how do we actually just listen to people and love people and communicate in the same way? So, well, I want to ask this next question because it connects to my own story a little bit. So we know that something that you loved in your youth that you continue to do is to skateboard. And I used to skateboard myself. And back
I have a picture of you in my head. I don't know if it's real,
I'm going to date myself. This was like, skateboarders know this was like the days of the Bones Brigade, the original Bones Brigade. Like, that's how old I am. But it was awesome. It was awesome. Middle school in Santa Cruz, California, right? And so in the 80s. So, but you say that you embrace skateboarding as a perpetual tutor in humility, which I love. So what resonance do you see in middle-aged skateboarding and church planting or pastoring in general?
Yeah, I was listening to this podcast, I don't know, a few years ago, and there was a kind of a guy who does brain science, I think at some West Coast university, and he said, skateboarding introduces you to constant failure, and because of that, it creates resilience. And I love that. I mean, because you think like I skate, I re-engaged with it because I'm incurably nostalgic and wanted to meet people in Tacoma. So, but in stepping into skateboarding, I think again, you keep falling and you keep bleeding and you keep ending up with this body that's at certain points are black and blue. One time, Dwight, I had fallen so much on my elbows. I was preaching and my elbows were swollen, and people would come up to me and they were like, how are your elbows okay? Did God make you that way, or did you get hurt? And then so like I bear on my body the marks, you know. So and I think that like I've become failure used to be so scary, and it still is. I don't want to pretend it isn't, but skateboarding has been one of the catalysts for becoming comfortable with continued failure and delighted in eventual success. And I think that it's spiritually formative in that way. You know, it helps me become okay. Yeah, trying something repeatedly.
I love that. I love that.
Are we going to see you on the Olympics anytime soon? Okay.
Well, hey,
checking.
Tony Hawk is still going.
I know,
you know?
That's what I mean. There's these young and older, I'll just say elders, right, of the field.
I've got a mini ramp in my garage, and I will be having my own private Olympics there my garage.
That's good. Well, let's end with a conversation about your book, Terrible Beauty. How has working on this book helped you reflect on or process your own spiritual formation as you've engaged in this work of planting churches? And which other books or authors or thinkers have been important to you in your own spiritual formation and or your philosophy of church planning?
Yeah, good question. Well,
I know we're just going there from skateboarding. Yes, if you're following at home.
It's related. I mean, certainly skateboarding shows up in this book project that I'm working on. So this book, Terrible Beauty, it's kind of this memoir forward story of the process of stepping out into uncertainty, into church planning. And I think so it has lots of parallels with anybody that's ever stepped out. What happens when you step out, right? You face yourself and all the anxieties that show up there. And so, you know, I mean, this is a longer conversation, but my wife and I talk pretty candidly, and whether it's an Anchor or other spaces, of just that being the most difficult year of our marriage. As she is an introvert, I'm an extrovert. I'm kind of needing to please people, wanting to please people, wanting to win them over. She's wanting stability, and so we were often missing each other. And I think that there's this. Okay, well, that could be a disaster, or it could be a spiritually formative opportunity. And it was probably 30-70, right? 70% spiritually or 100% spiritually formative. But definitely there were some elements of disaster that didn't go full bloom, thank God. And I think even just stepping into spaces of like having a conversation with somebody that a friend of a friend of a friend introduced you to, and you don't even know who they are, but you're meeting them for coffee, and you have to kind of like make sure your breathing is under control before you get out of your car. You know, all those things are a part of stepping into the space. So the book deals with that and the stages of working through anxiety and stepping into these one step at a time, you could say, into this terrible beauty. But the books, as far as me, that have impacted me, you know, this book I'm writing, Terrible Beauty, I'm writing it because what I needed most in that first year was a friend. And there's a lot of church plant manuals out there, but there's far fewer books that basically are saying, I understand with you, there's light. And so the books that helped me were more along those lines, maybe not about church plant per se, but whether it's Henry Nouwen or David Benner, books that speak to the areas of wound and calling and healing. And then there's kind of, you know, the more kind of missiological books that I tried as best I could imperfectly to bring from the top shelf to the bottom shelf. But those were the books that were most compelling to me, I think, at those early stages. It was far less the manual and far more the I'm here with you and I understand, and the theology of mission books.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much for sharing your insights and wisdom with us today.
Yeah, it's great. I echo that. Thanks. And to our audience, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Pivot Podcast. You can spread the word about Pivot by leaving a review for us on our Apple Podcasts, or for catching us on YouTube and leaving a review there.
And finally, the best compliment you can give us is to share Pivot with a friend. So until next time, this is Dwight Shiley and Terry Elton signing off.